what happened was this. The calves, at night, we put them up in a part of the barn located here on the right. And they have a little paddock that they go into during the evening. And during the day, they're brought out, and they walk across this dry lot area over to the fence here, so they have access to all of these pastures. And they actually can run with the goats. They're small enough, they're not aggressive, they're kind of goofy, and they're pretty docile, actually. But still, they're kind of like 13-year-old boys. They have the mental attention span of a chimpanzee. So instead of sometimes going through the gate, they'll take a turn and they'll either try to go back in, or as they did on Saturday, they simply walked along the fence and they saw that this gate was open and frolicked out, which has happened before. And what I do when that happens is I walk up to the gate and I check out to make sure there's none of the big buffalo or, kind of standing around at all. I didn't see them. Walked over to the crest of the hill, I'll show you that in a moment, and saw the buffalo were lounging under the trees in the tree line over to my right now, over here, quite a distance away. And the little ones were just kind of gambling about and goofing around and teasing me, I guess, I don't know, just on the other side of the fence. So I've done same thing I've done a dozen times. I just walked through the gate, take my cell phone up, and I tried calling Sue to let her know where I was. So since the calves are so close to this fence and the big buffs were lounging around, they kind of are laying on their sides, chewing their cud, having a smoke break, whatever they do, basically just kind of chilling out. So it was very idyllic, if you will, going out here. Beautiful day, beautiful day. I stopped in this area and tried to call Sue again because I still have a good sight line on the house. Didn't get her, so I closed my phone. When I did that, the calves who were starting to turn took a little bit of a romp forward, a little more in this direction. I looked over here, I didn't see anything at all. Of course, the buffs are still laying down on the other side of the hill, and there was nothing else. So I thought, we're still pretty good here, nothing's going to happen anyway. So I started walking again to head them off. Buff paths, or cow paths, whatever you want to call them, they follow the key line to the highest portion of the hill to head out to back pasture. And right now, you can't see where the buffs are lying because we're a little bit higher than there and they're kind of blocked from view. So they're blocked from view from me. That means that the calves are blocked from view for them. They're not going to see them or do anything goofy. And the calves are out walking over here. I'm walking on this way so as to outflank them. And basically what happens is I get on the other side, just raise my arms and say, come on girls, let's go. Come on, back, let's go. And always they head back to the gate and out to the other pasture. So that's what happened. The difference this time was they went out just a little bit further. So I'm walking along this cow path. And I can't see the large buffalo. And they're walking parallel to me. And what I've got to do is I've just got to head them off. That's all. And then it's fairly easy to control them. So at this point, the calves are starting to turn. I looked over, didn't see anything. And mind you, I wasn't terribly concerned about the buffalo because, they've never shown any kind of active interest in the calves. And generally when I've been out here by myself, they just do what they do. And I do about doing what I do. And if they notice me, generally, my herd boss cows, who are very large animals, beautiful, beautiful animals, will come up to me and I'll scratch them and pat them and they just walk off and do their business and I go about mine. So anyways, I was turning the calves, we started turning here, and I got them about where Max is right now. They started coming in, I'm like this, and they took off running, which is unusual for them. Usually they either come up to me or they'd saunter back. I turned and the buffalo were coming up over this ridge right here. I just had about enough time to notice it. I tried to cover up a little bit and I put my arms out to scare them, to move them off. The ones in the lead saw me and they split off. but then I don't know how many behind them didn't. And even when they were trying to probably avoid me, I was able to push and get out of the way of a couple of them. And then I got hit by maybe a flank, I don't know, and knocked down on the ground. And the rest of them just simply ran over me. And I was under them, and I covered my head, and I was trying to roll out of the way. They stepped on my left arm. I remember that very distinctly. And then after it was over, and mind you, there's dust and the smell of manure and a lot of confusion. I was kind of on my knees. There's a bare spot over here. I was on my knees. I got up on my knees and I looked from this low position, and I didn't see anything to my right. And I looked out over, and the cows were over here, and they were kind of wandering, looking at the calves, and the calves were running back, and some of the cows were chasing them. And the only thing I saw was safety being this way to a brush pile that you can see here. And at that point, I only had been run over by the buffalo. There was no aggressive action on their part. I was convinced they really didn't see me. They were focused on the calves. And so I stood up, and as soon as I got to my feet, I was hit by a dump truck or something, and it was Leoben. He came and he caught me right square in the back of just above the buttocks on my pelvis, and he blasted me towards this way. And I flew off the ground. I don't know how, I was airborne. I landed on my back, I rolled and looked up, and he was just all over me. He was grunting, and he was jamming his head down into the dirt. I had my hands up, and I was pushing on his horns to try to get him off of me. I couldn't get him off. I had to get myself away from him, because there's no way in hell that I'd had enough strength to fight him at all. Just a matter of trying to redirect what he was doing, get my body the hell out of the way from where he was horning the ground. And I managed to get back a little bit. I kicked him in the face a couple of times, got to my feet, and I'm backing up like this, keeping him in front of me, heading towards those trees. And he kept pushing at me and pushing at me and pushing and pushing and pushing. And a little further back, and he pushed, then he'd bang into me and knock me down, and I'd roll over, and I'd get up and push back and push back. And then he would come at me with his head low. He came up under me, and he caught my belt on one of his horns. And that was unfriggin' believable. He lifted me up in the air, and we've seen them, you know, pick up hay bales by the string, and they whip them around and throw them around and run with them. That's what he did with me. He had me by the belt, and he was whipping his head back and forth, and then he put his head down. I hit the ground and hit the ground, and he'd whip me up, and then he threw his head up, and I flew for I don't know how far. And I don't know how far he carried me, if it was in a zigzag, if it was straight, I just don't know. Well, most of the distance I traveled was either being hooked on his horn by my belt, or when he put his head down, he caught me in between my legs with his snout and was just slammed up into my groin area and rode some distance, I don't know how far, then threw me over his back. And you know, and I'd stand up, and I would be able to, I'd roll over, I'd figure out where the heck I was at. I could still see the brush pile, and I kept heading towards it. I'd stand up and turn my back to the brush pile, facing him. And he'd come at me again, and he'd keep backpedaling, moving towards that brush pile. And he was driving me that way because he was facing me head on. He hooked my collar of my shirt at one point. I actually had it buttoned. It was pretty well ripped up. There were probably 2 buttons that were left. Sleeves were all ripped up, and it was all shredded. And he hooked a horn. He came at my head and flipped his head at me. And I remember moving out of the way and then getting slid back. And his horn, it got between my collar and my neck, and he took off with that. And I just remember choking as he was running. And then the buttons broke, and I fell next to him and rolled out of the way. And that was, I think that was at an angle to the fence.
I came back in the field Sunday morning following the accident. I was trying to retrieve some of the things that Ron had lost because Ron kept asking for for the phone and asking for his knife and that kind of thing. So I came back approximately where I thought the accident had happened based on what he told me. To the left here is the flag where I found the phone, and his phone was open. But that was the first, kind of the closest thing that I found here. As we move toward the fence, the orange flag to the right is where I found his knife. So it would have been torn off the belt. I didn't find the belt. So if he would have had the knife, he probably could have done something with it, but he'd lost that fairly early. But that's where I found his shirt over here, and that was torn up. There were holes in it, but it was a plaid shirt that he'd been wearing. And here I found the phone case. So that must have come off the belt again when he lost the belt. The last flag that I positioned is well over to the left, and that's where I found his hat.
Wow.
So things were scattered all over the place. I never found his glasses. We hope to find those at some point, because those were his favorite glasses, but that was it. And again, I never found the belt.
What I remember that when I was going for my ride on the belt when everything broke, he threw me, and I flew for quite a distance. That I remember, and I also remember that I lost my hat just about at that time. And the last item from my body, the last thing, was I took off my shirt, and I put it over his head and over his eyes, and I was gouging into his eye, and I was punching and punching, and while I held on to a horn so that he was partially blinded by that shirt, and kept punching and punching and punching. And I don't know if the shirt fell off or if he backed off and threw it off. But the fact that the shirt was here and the hat's over there, it must have been, he must have driven me back away from the brush pile somewhat, because the hat, I thought the hat would be found further back. So, and my memory is that I was pretty close to the brush pile when I took my shirt off, and that's just simply not the case. It can't be. Taking me down and slamming me and shoving at me as I kept going back and back and back. And every time I got knocked down in here somewhere, and as I was trying to get up, he hit me and knocked me in my back. And that's when I just really started kicking at his face. And that's when the cows started gathering up around to see what was going on. And I was able to roll over, get on my feet, get a real good view over here. And I thought I can make it if I tried to run. I couldn't move my left leg. And so I got up, and I started staggering back with the cows pressing in, and him shoving me and shoving me. And it's around at that point that my bigger girls started pushing in on him a little bit, which they tend to do, especially the boss cows, and there's someone they want to try to, I call it controlling. Who knows what they're thinking? Who knows? But they were squeezing in on him, and I was able to get a few steps back, and more. Then he'd break three, come at me, and I'd push down on his head, try to keep my body away from him, and he'd lift me up, and he'd run and lift me up, and then he'd run, and he'd throw me, and I'd roll and get up, and he'd come at me again, until I got closer over here. I saw that I was really close to the brush pile right here. I could probably make it over that brush pile if I got to it. And then it's another 30 feet or so, 20 to 30 feet to the fence. So I started backing up here, backing up, when I was driven from here by him this way. And so I'm now going parallel, and I'm punching at him, I'm holding onto the horn, I'm hitting his head and hitting his head and hitting his head, throw me to the side. I'd try to stand up, he'd come at me and hitting him, and the cows are starting to really push in on him. And it was here where there's some broken sticks. I was grabbing these, and I was hitting his nose, and he was backing off. Then he'd come at me, and the stick would go. I'd pick up another one and hit him, kept getting back further and further. And what I wanted to do was to get right over here, because I know they can't go over the trees, the logs. I just couldn't get back. I couldn't get to it. He kept pushing me back and farther back till we wound up right over here. And here, because I remember this stump. I remember the stump of that piece of trunk right here from our firewood collecting, that the cows began to really squeeze in on him. It said B13, B04, M131, Kate's mom. They were squeezing in and pushing on him. So, and all the while this is happening, I'm yelling, I'm trying to get help, and of course no one can see me because I'm at the base of the hill. No one can see me. So I stopped yelling and I started talking to the cows. It was, shh, easy babe, easy girl, easy. I'd touch them and pet them, and he'd push, and they'd push at him, and he'd push, and they'd push at him. I'd touch them, and easy, easy girl, easy. And I stepped over, and 131 stood right here, right in this area, right here. And I was petting her, and the cows will work over the bull. The bull doesn't screw around with the boss cows. And she was breathing her, it was just like Bella's just heavy breathing, and I was petting her, and she started calming down. So I started walking, and she was walking with me. And so the bull was she was between me and the bull. I got over to here, there's some sticks here, reached down, picked one up. The bull came, I hit him, and he backed off. I backed off a bit, and then he came at me and hit me again, right square, right in through here, and threw me back. And I felt the brush pile right here. And I stepped into the brush pile, somewhere in here, I don't know exactly where, but stepped into the brush pile, further in, a little further in, and they stopped. He just stopped right here. Stopped. And then I stepped back a little further, got back, and that's when everything changed. That's when it just got, you know, I don't know what happened, why, but everything slowed down. It was like they were out here grazing and floating around, and there were these symmetric white posts, probably matching the fence posts, I guess, all across the field, everywhere, right next to me, up and down, perfectly straight rows. And I just heard this voice saying, over here, come on, over here, over here. And I turned, and my mom and dad were standing right by the fence post over here, as real as can be. And it was like, come on, Ronnie, come on, come on. So I stepped over the logs, keeping the logs between me and the bucks, stepping over, and backing up. When I turned, I had two of the cows, one was coming this way and one this way, probably just curious. Probably. I picked up a branch from the pile, started walking to the fence, and the two cows came, and I tapped one and tapped the other with the end of it, and tapped them, tapped the other, they took off, and I walked up to the fence and put the stick in the top wire, and forced the hot wire down. I put my hand up here, and try to get my left leg up, and I couldn't get my left leg up. So I put my right leg on top of the stick that's in the fence, and got myself up, swung my leg over, and stepped over the fence. And that was pretty much it. And once I got on the other side, this bright light thing, and the pillars, and they were gone. And it was just a sound of the trees and the rustling of the trees and the breeze in my face. I could hear birds. So I knew I was hurt because I was bleeding all the way from the middle of the pasture back. So I stopped, I leaned against the post, and I started figuring out what was wrong with me. I could move my hands, I could feel my toes. I started feeling for blood, and I was bleeding all down my arm and side. And I knew that a hit in the armpit it's fatal. So I took what was left of my t-shirt and I wadded it up and I put it, and I felt this big hole in my armpit. I pushed it into there, and pulled my arm against my side and just locked it in as tight as I could. And then I started walking home. You can barely, right here, we're not too far from Blue Dog Greens, but I knew I couldn't get through the trees or over the fence. So the best thing was to head home. And to do that, I just walked along the fence and I kept telling myself, you know, it's easy steps, don't try to go fast, control your breathing, slow, breathe. I counted to myself, I talked to myself, I tried humming, anything just to stay calm. And every once in a while I'd start stumbling and I'd deliberately, I'd move and touch the fence. And I went all around the fence, all the way back up to the house.